Hello, and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. Hello, Warbirders. The first part of this video is on the history of Leroy Grumman, the start of his company, and the evolution that would lead to the F4F Wildcat. If you want to skip straight to the Wildcat, well, you just go ahead, you skip to it, and we'll see you there. Leroy Grumman seemed like he was born with the aviation bug. He was already interested in aviation during his early schooling, and by the time he graduated in 1911, he said this during his high school salutatory address. Open quotes, "The final perfection of the aeroplane will be one of the greatest triumphs that man has ever gained over nature." Close quotes. In his early life, he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering from Cornell. During World War I, he joined the U.S. Naval Reserve and was commissioned as U.S. Naval Aviator No. 1216. He became a flight instructor, flew in a bomber squadron, was sent to MIT to study aeronautical engineering, and was a test pilot for both Curtiss and Navy-built flying boats. He had been working for the Loening Aeronautical Engineering Corporation in New York City for 10 years when, in 1929, due to the beginning of the Great Depression, Loening decided to close shop. But Leroy took advantage of the disaster, mortgaged his house for $17,000, and with a couple of other colleagues, hired 13 more employees and formed the Grumman Corporation. At this point, to ensure survival, the Grumman Company really needed some contracts for naval aircraft. Leroy was always looking for an edge. He found it when he heard of the Navy's desire for aircraft with retractable landing gear. Leroy had already been working on the idea back at Loening for their air yacht idea, so he completed the design, got the patent for retractable landing gear for aeroplanes in 1932. The retractable gear, which was hand-cranked by the way, made it into Grumman's first complete aircraft design for the U.S. Navy, the FF-1. In the summer of 1933, FF-1s began equipping Fighter Squadron VF-5B of the USS Lexington, beginning in June 1933, where it got the nickname as the Fifi. The Fifi was a great success, with some 55 built under license in Canada for the RCAF, and some examples being sold to Spain, Nicaragua, Mexico, and Japan. It actually saw combat in the Spanish Civil War. Although outclassed by this time, one example did get one kill, a Heinkel HE-59B flying boat. The two-seat FF-1 evolved into the single-seat F4F-1, which was a bit aerodynamically cleaner and sported a stronger twin Wasp Jr. radial engine. It was able to fly 22 miles per hour faster, 55 were ordered, and this would also be the start of Grumman's aircraft having the F, insert number, F, designations that would continue on into the future. The Navy had a few complaints about the F2F, namely poor stability and spin recovery characteristics, so the next evolution began. The same Pratt & Whitney Twin Wasp Jr. engine was retained, but behind it the fuselage was lengthened and the area of the wings increased, while having smaller wheel diameters eliminated the landing gear bulge behind the cowling of the F2F, allowing for greater fuselage streamlining. Although the Navy's test program for the F2F was pretty rough, with one prototype breaking up in flight, killing the test pilot, and another requiring a bailout after an unsuccessful spin recovery, 147 were eventually built and entered service. The next Grumman naval fighter, F4F, was to be the same type of slow evolution from the earlier biplane model. But just like how biological evolution sometimes has to deal with rapid environmental change, so did Grumman and the F4F. The environmental change that occurred was that the era of biplane fighters was over, and it became obvious to all that the Grumman biplane offering was going to lose out to Brewster's F2A1. So in 1935, Grumman's team slammed the brakes on the X4F biplane, renamed it the X4F-1 to get it out of the way, and started working on the X4F-2 monoplane. In the competition against the Brewster Buffalo, the prototype X4F-2 was a little faster, but the Buffalo won out on maneuverability. The Buffalo won the competition. So, with Brewster getting the contract for the Buffalo, Leroy Grumman and his team gave up and went home, right? Of course they did not. They started working right away on another version, which was the X4F-3. It got new wings, with the span increasing from 34 feet to 38 feet. And these were given distinctive square tips. It also got a new tail. But the most important addition was a stronger, supercharged version of the Pratt & Whitney R1830 Twin Wasp radial engine. First flying on the 12th of February 1939, the prototype X4F-3 achieved an impressive top speed of 335 miles an hour at 21,000 feet. Natural selection had finally done its job, and Grumman seemed to have a winner. Orders began arriving, but perhaps surprisingly, not from the U.S. Navy just yet. Already at war, France and Britain's Anglo-French purchasing board was on a shopping spree for aircraft. France placed some orders, but the country fell before they could be delivered, and these aircraft ended up going to the Royal Navy. They named their F-4Fs the Martlet, which is a mythical bird used in English heraldry. It is said to be hatched without feet, so that it can never stop flying and will not land or roost until its death. They are supposed to be symbols for continuous effort. The Martlet is the symbol of my alma mater, McGill University, but for the purposes of our story, the Martlet was aptly named as it would be continuously produced and would continuously fight without rest right up until the end of the war. Unlike so many aircraft that were replaced by another company product during World War II, the Wildcat continued to be produced right up until the end of the war. True, Grumman stopped building them in 1943 to focus on the Wildcat's new baby sister, the Hellcat, but General Motors kept on churning them out until an incredible total of 7,885 had been built for the Fleet Air Arm, the U.S. Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Royal Canadian Navy. The Brits were very happy to get the Martlet as a replacement for their older two-seat Fairey Fulmars, which just couldn't compete against the more modern single-seat fighters. Also, British-made navalized Spitfires were slow in coming, as every single land-based machine was needed for the RAF. The first Martlets did not have folding wings, but they were armed with 4 50 caliber Browning machine guns with 450 rounds per gun. The Brits liked their Martlets, with Eric Winkle Brown, the British test pilot who flew just about everything, stating, open quotes, "I would still assess the aircraft as the outstanding naval fighter of the early years of World War II. I can vouch as a matter of personal experience, this Grumman fighter was one of the finest shipboard aeroplanes ever created." Close quotes. On Christmas Day 1940, a land-based Martlet gave an early Christmas present to the Fleet Air Arm by shooting down a Junkers Ju-88 bomber over Scapa Flow Naval Base, which was the first combat victory by a U.S.-built fighter in British service in World War II. The Brits used their Martlets in a new way by placing 6 of them on a former German merchant ship that had been converted into what would become known as an escort aircraft carrier. This vessel, HMS Audacity, definitely showed the characteristic of audacity when on September 1941 its Martlets shot down multiple Luftwaffe FW-200 Condors during highly effective convoy escorts. In 1941, the next evolution occurred with the release of the F4F-4. This one featured another Grumman patented product, the stow wing folding system, which folds the wings back and along the fuselage rather than hinging them somewhere along the wing and folding the tips together above the aircraft. This feature instantly allowed double the number of aircraft to be stored aboard an aircraft carrier. The Dash 4 also had 2 extra 50 cals, although fewer rounds with only about 20 seconds of firing time total. The Dash 4 also had plumbing to carry droppable auxiliary fuel tanks, either two 58-gallon tanks or a single 42-gallon tank. The new fighter was known in the US as the Wildcat, and the Royal Navy adopted that name too. The new fighter had put on weight with the new guns and mods, and so a final version known as the FM-2 was introduced. It had been put on a diet, and so was 450 pounds lighter, and also had a more powerful 1,350 horsepower engine with a single-stage 2-speed supercharger, and some with water injection. Speed and rate of climb were improved, and the type was more versatile to boot, having increased internal fuel capacity, wing racks, and zero-length rails, allowing it to carry a 250-pound bomb or 5-inch rockets under each wing. Nearly 1,200 Martlets and Wildcats were flown by the British, and they did great service in the Atlantic. About 27 U-boats were destroyed either directly by F4Fs or with their aid. For if they didn't sink the U-boats on their own, they would use their hail of fire from their 50 calibers to suppress the U-boat's own AA guns so that other bombing aircraft could do the job. The Wildcats' weaknesses were not really seen in the Atlantic because they did not usually have to dogfight against other enemy fighters. However, in March 1945, Wildcats shot down 4 Messerschmitt Bf-109s over Norway, and these were the Fleet Air Arm's last victories by Wildcats. As for the American experience with the Wildcat, at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack, the U.S. Navy only had one fully equipped Wildcat squadron, this being VF-6 on Enterprise. There were some Wildcats at Iwa Marine Air Corps Station on Oahu, and 9 of these were damaged or destroyed during the attack. On Wake Island the next day, 7 Wildcats were lost, another 5 fought hard, a first bomber kill on the 9th of December, sinking a destroyer, Kisaragi, and the Japanese invasion force was forced to retreat. Although the Wildcat's sturdy construction, armor, and self-sealing fuel tanks could aid in its survival, it was outclassed by its main Pacific rival, the Mitsubishi Zero, which was faster, more maneuverable, and had a longer range. In his Midway after-action report, James Jimmy Thatch wrote, open quotes, "It is indeed surprising that any of our pilots returned alive. Any success our fighter pilots may have had against the Japanese Zero fighter is not due to the performance of the airplane we fly, but is due to the comparatively poor marksmanship of the Japanese, stupid mistakes made by a few of their pilots, and superior marksmanship and teamwork of some of our pilots. The F4F airplane is pitifully inferior in climb, maneuverability, and speed." Close quotes. If the U.S. was able to use certain advantages, such as early warnings by coastal watchers or radar, then the Wildcats would be able to get up high and dive in for hit-and-run attacks. These would negate their disadvantages. If they didn't have these advantages and had to tangle directly with the Zeros, then they were at a serious disadvantage. Even though inferior as dogfighters, as stated before, the ruggedness of the Wildcat became legendary, even to the Japanese pilots. Zero Ace Saburo Sakai wrote, open quotes, "I had full confidence in my ability to destroy the Grumman and decided to finish off the enemy fighter with only my 7.7mm machine guns. I turned the 20mm cannon switch to the off position and closed in. For some reason, even after I had poured about 500 or 600 rounds of ammunition directly into the Grumman, the airplane did not fall, but kept on flying. I thought this very odd. It had never happened before, and closed the distance between the two airplanes until I could almost reach out and touch the Grumman. To my surprise, the Grumman's rudder and tail were torn to shreds, looking like old pieces of torn rag. With his plane in such a condition, no wonder the pilot was unable to continue fighting. A Zero, which had taken that many bullets, would have been a ball of fire by now." Close quotes. U.S. Navy and U.S. Marine Corps Wildcats played major roles in the defense of Wake Island, the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Battle of Midway, and the Guadalcanal campaign. However, it was obvious that something more was needed, and the lessons from the Pacific air battles were being fed back to Grumman for yet another evolution. This one would be significant enough to get a whole new cat. But for that, we'll have to wait for the next episode. Edward Henry Butch O'Hare had quite the story. He was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and his dad was a lawyer who worked closely with none other than Al Capone, the famous gangster. At some point, Butch's father turned on Capone and provided incriminating evidence which helped put Capone away for tax evasion. For this, the elder O'Hare would be gunned down by Capone's goons in 1939. But back in 1933, Butch entered the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, Maryland, and in 1939 began his flight training. Upon completing his training, in May 1940, he was assigned to Fighter Squadron 3, VF-3, on board USS Saratoga. He trained on the Grumman F4F and Brewster F-2A Buffalo. He was soon known as having exceptional flying abilities as well as gunnery excellence. He was also pretty good with the ladies, or at least one lady. On Monday, July 21st, he made his first flight in our featured aircraft, the F4F, and in a series of hops, ended up in St. Louis the next day. While visiting the wife of a friend in hospital, O'Hare met nurse Rita Wooster and proposed to her on the spot, which was the very first time they had met. 3 months later, they were married, and their honeymoon was in Hawaii, although they had traveled there in separate ships, he on the Saratoga and her on the liner Lurlane. On January 11th, 1942, Saratoga was hit by a Japanese torpedo and was sent for extensive repairs on the west coast. So O'Hare's squadron was transferred to the USS Lexington, and it was from this ship that he made his most famous flight. At 10:15 on February 20th, 1942, Lexington was 450 miles from the harbor at Rabaul when radar contacts were picked up 35 miles from the ship. 6 Wildcats were scrambled. Actually, there were 3 contacts, and so the group was split into 3 groups of 2. One pair found and splashed a big Japanese Mavis flying boat. The second pair also ran into and splashed another Mavis. The third contact was not found. Later at 16:25, the Wildcats were scrambled again, this time to deal with 9 Japanese Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers. The majority of the formation went after the Bettys, with O'Hare's wingman, Marion Duff Delfino, being held back as a reserve. It was lucky that they were, because soon another formation was spotted. O'Hare and Duff headed for the attack. Unluckily enough, Duff soon was to be disappointed when his guns jammed. That left just O'Hare. O'Hare dove in first from the formation's right side and using a quick deflection shot knocked out a Betty's engine. Then he switched to another Betty and set it afire. Although neither were knocked out, both Bettys dropped out of formation and O'Hare turned to attack again, this time from the left side. He hit a third Betty, causing it to dump bombs and run. His fourth shot knocked down that Betty for a definite kill. Swooping in again from the left side, time was getting short. The Bettys were arriving at their bomb release points. He shot down another Betty and then hit the lead plane's engine, ripping off the entire nacelle, causing it and the plane to drop away. During O'Hare's fourth attack, he realized he was out of ammo. The surviving Bettys dropped their bombs at Lexington, but because of O'Hare's harassment, all the bombs missed. One badly damaged Betty tried a kamikaze attack, but also missed the ship. Captain Frederick C. Sherman, the commander of the Lexington, was convinced that O'Hare's actions had saved his ship, and O'Hare was selected as the very first naval aviator to receive the Medal of Honor. At the ceremony with President Franklin D. Roosevelt, O'Hare's wife Rita placed the medal around Butch's neck. On the night of November 26, 1943, O'Hare participated in one of the first night fighter operations from the carrier USS Enterprise, where Hellcats and Avengers were used together to intercept Japanese bombers. He was again after a Betty when O'Hare's Hellcat was caught in crossfire between the Betty and the Avenger. O'Hare's Hellcat dropped out and disappeared. Even after expansive searching, nothing was ever found of Butch or his aircraft. But now if you're ever traveling through Chicago's O'Hare Airport, you'll know the story behind the name. So that is the story of the Wildcat. Next in this series, we'll be looking at the upgrade to this kitty, the Grumman Hellcat. You do not want to miss that, so make sure you subscribe and hit the bell to never miss any new content. Please like this video. Become a member to get bonuses such as extra episodes, loyalty badges, the use of special Warbird emojis, shoutouts, and priority reply to comments, as well as the satisfaction of knowing that you are supporting this channel. Until next time.